our lives are very designed for us. So we can either live life through design or through default. So I grew up partly on a farm in the UK, in the southwest of the UK. And I and my family loved this farm. It was a place of classic Devon rolling hills and hedges and cows. And in the background was the wild places of Dartmoor up on the horizon, this sort of grey, windy, windswept, very wild. Of course, we romanticise that because there's also a place of pouring rain, farmers going out in all weathers to do all sorts of things with sheep, lots of mud and poo and, you know, manures all over the place and super hard physical work, but also learning lots and lots of skills. We sort of painfully left the UK, left Devon anyway, and lived in Singapore for 5 years. But around about 16 or 17, for some reason, something started inspiring me a lot. This was the mid-1970s, and we had all these amazing teachers coming out from the States and the UK and other places, and they brought this wave of writing. There's no, the sort of 1970s writing around small is beautiful and limits to growth and Silent Spring and Fritjof Capra's Tao of Physics and all that sort of thing. And I was lucky enough also to be doing an ecology course. In early days that ecology would have been taught up in the rainforest in Malaysia. Not long after that, we all moved to Australia. I kind of travelled with these ideas that suddenly I've been very, very excited by into a completely new place. Australia might seem similar to, say, England or somewhere else, but it's radically different, especially to a 17-year-old. And so I had all these kind of sustainability ideas and farming skills and things like that. And I'd always had this, one part of me had this weird sense of idealism that who knows where it came from. Even as a young kid, I remember dreaming as it rained outside endlessly of how to make England sustainable. I don't know where that came from, how to do the fields and how to do the transport systems and things like that. So came to Australia, went back to the UK for a while, came back to Australia again and went to university for a while and dropped out because it all seemed completely irrelevant. Everyone talks, such a disconnect between everyone's ideals and values and what they're doing. So I dropped out and became a builder's labourer. Also, it was a way of being very physical. As a young man, I grew up with physicality. And if I think about it, so one of the things I studied in my doctorate was eco-psychology, if you like, or sense of place became a big thing. So sense of place became very important to me because of these moves, which were both very exciting, but also kind of dislocating, and it leaves a weird feeling for quite a long time until you can come to terms with it. And that can take a long, long time. And so in a way, unconsciously, what I think I was trying to do was connect with the ground in Australia. You know, to dig into it, to touch it, to move piles of soil, to make things was unconsciously a way of my body landing in Australia. And, you know, Australia is an exciting but disconnected place, I would say, in many, many ways. And then I was lucky to be drawn into some training, first of all, some permaculture courses. That was with Bill Mollison. And then it was a decade of land care. I ended up at Western Sydney doing social ecology in the mid-90s, and it was amazing. So it had eco-psychology, it had sense of place, it had chaos and complexity, it had history of ecology, it had Jungian psychology, it had much, much, much more. It was anarchy. It was amazing, creative anarchy that reignited my love of reading. So I've always had this thing as kind of weaving of reading and doing, reading and doing, reading and doing. It's very important that we learn from what we're doing. So one of the things that came up in that research was a thing called Edenic narratives. Joseph Campbell said we need to understand the stories we're living, or the stories will live us. One of quite a few things that came out of that study was that the importance of a critical approach. That doesn't mean criticizing, it means looking at the arrangements we enter ourselves into and learning very much from practice. So it's very much about practice. It's not about some doctrine. So permaculture isn't a doctrine, it's a set of practices which are exciting and fantastic, and they need to be evolving all the time. Sometimes anything can be treated as a doctrine. Permaculture can be, so can football training, so can be anything. So it's not necessarily useful to do that. You know, it's actually useful to keep things as an active set of practices. Ethics drives permaculture. Permaculture is fantastic. It also is problematic sometimes, but it's probably the only framework we can use that gives us a framework to actually address almost everything that's going on. So it's incredibly valuable. And it's fantastic, especially for holistic systemic thinking. It's fantastic for engaging with the organic world. It's fantastic as a practical guide to getting things done for people who want to do something different and sustainable and regenerative and healing. So ethics drives permaculture. and drives what we're all trying to do, because we're always evaluating how effective or good or better this action is over that action. The three ethics of permaculture they're more an ethic rather than a set of ethics. So they're intentions. They're very worthy intentions, but they're not ethical systems as such. An ethical system needs to offer you a way of evaluating complex situations. So you're sitting down with something a dilemma which is incredibly hard to work out. Do these trees stay in? Do these trees come out? Do we involve these people? Do we not involve these people? What do we do with the produce? Where do we share it? Where do we put our boundaries around our knowledge versus sharing it? All these things are incredibly complicated. There are ethical systems like utilitarianism or care ethics or deontology. So I think these traditional forms of ethical approach are still really, really important. We ask, is it your sacred duty to live your life as close to your values as you can? And it's challenging, but it's also very exciting. We can suggest systems that then people then hopefully get a chance to explore for themselves. We generally ask people to have a look at Carol Gilligan's Care Ethics, which is about 20 or 30 years old at least. And it's kind of seen as a feminist approach to ethics. Because if you think about it a little bit, some of the other things like utilitarianism is incredibly useful. It's a bit like a bunch of old white men being quite abstract. So, and that's fine, it has its place, but Care Ethics by Carol Gilligan is more like, what are the qualities of the relationship around you? Of course, there's whole systems around Indigenous values and practices and so on too, that people could learn from elders if they were lucky enough to, or all sorts of approaches out there.
Thank you very much for that.
Sometimes permaculture can kind of pit itself against like traditional farmers, but I've talked to a lot of older farmers, and they all have a set of ethics. They all have ethical aims. And to be the best farmer you can, or produce the best produce or the best soil or the best regenerated things, it's all of it's a series. It involves many, many things, but it definitely involves ethical decisions on an ongoing basis. So you're evaluating whether you use one weed removal method or another, or whether you even leave the weeds or not, or whether you employ certain labor, or whether people can walk through your land, or if it's private, or it's a constant set of ethical evaluations. Probably a lot of the time people just adopt the values that their community has had for a long time. But even within that, there's a range of things you're always thinking about. Should I do this? Should I do that? Often ethics is seen as like good versus bad. It's actually quite often for most people, it's one option against another option, and they're both good. So but you can't choose both of them. There's a opportunity cost. So is it this option or that option? This good option, which is mostly pretty good, or this option, which is mostly pretty good. So it's a continuous ethical, especially when you start moving into permaculture. It's a constant series of ethical dilemmas and choices, and you can make better ones and worse ones.
When you're working with farmers, you said you do workshops. What does that involve?
We have one called Healing Self, Healing Land, which is kind of horticultural therapy. A bunch of us did a review of permaculture. We decided that people these days are more conscious of the need for healing than maybe they were 20 years ago. Another one is called Walkabout Permaculture. Traditional permaculture can be critiqued a little bit maybe for assuming that everyone has a homestead and some land, or they want that. And a lot of people don't have that choice. They're mobile. They're either through choice or through circumstance. And so Walkabout Permaculture is about designing sustainable lives for people who are mobile or they're refugees. We've done 2 experimental workshops like this, asking elders to lead this also. So up in Bellingen, New South Wales, we had an elder, Uncle Michael Jarrett, co-teach this with us, and it was a very exciting fusion of acknowledging traditional wisdoms and practices and weaving this together with postmodern, post-industrial people traveling around the landscape, even between share houses or whatever. So that's Walkabout Permaculture. Another one is Design for Life, which is how we design things. So we're also quite keen for permaculture to be applied to everything. And that's how we came up with, and how Bridget O'Brien came up with, the Adapt game, which is now available and for sale. It's taken about 5 years to develop this. And it is basically that permaculture design boiled down to a design process. Adapt is predicated on the idea that if we don't adapt, especially in times of rapid and precarious change, it's not a good thing. We need to be adaptable, but it's also very much also predicated on the fact that we are not being narcissistic and selfish. We're actually doing things as a collective, and we're doing things in service of something. We're asking the question, what are we in service of? We're in the service of the planet, or really important causes. And so that is also very much based upon living out lives which are, as well as we can, which are ethical and creative and positive. So it's very much about empowering people to see our lives are very designed for us. So we can either live life through design or through default, like the things we're kind of presented with and we adopt those, or we're scared to change from. We live lives by not designing anything or by being scared to design things. What a lot of people do too is they then design by impulse. So they go, oh, bugger it, I'm doing my own thing now. And they make choices which are very, very impulsive. So our ADAPT game is also a very holistic, systemic approach to the design. So it kind of supports you and encourages you to explore other options. It also asks you to answer some difficult questions, because a card will come up and say, what are the ethics of this? Or how are you going to put this into action? And we don't always like to go to the difficult places in designing approaches. The difficult places are also often the fertile places. And so by the end of a round of ADAPT, you'll come up with a much more involved plan, putting your dream or desire or need into action.